My name is Donald Hamm. I'm a senior software architect with Afterman Software. Jason Reardon, who's my colleague, is also a senior software architect at Afterman. He's the friend that's going to help record this. We've been doing this for quite a while. I've been doing it for over 31 years. I got started in 1988, like I was telling you earlier, with DOS programming and doing Windows 1, if you can imagine, Dr. DOS, Digital Research DOS. So I've done a lot of different things over the 31 years. I can't even believe it's been that long, but it is. Back, like I was telling the folks earlier, I built my first PC because you couldn't go to a Best Buy then and build it. It was Radio Shack or whatever was around, and the first one I built was an 8080. So you can imagine that before the 8088 really kicked off the PC revolution. So it was prior to that. So what we're going to talk about, I've got a lot of things here, but we don't have to go through all of them. I think what we want to try to focus on is a little bit about what we consider a services application or a SOA. We want to also talk about legacy applications, because that's what I deal with a lot, is legacy applications. Early in my career, I was always having to work with mainframes on the PC. We had to be able to communicate. We used attaché mate at the time to do our communications back and forth between the mainframe and the PC world. And of course, we had the client-server architectures, and then you had the three-tier architectures, and architecture this or architecture du jour, whatever you want to call it. So it has evolved. A lot of things that were old or new again. A lot of them are rebranded. But what we want to try to focus on here is approaches to take applications that you already have and start thinking about how you're going to break these out so you can start leveraging what DDD or domain-driven design has. There's other parts of domain-driven design that Jason and I spend a lot of time on, and that's the distributed domain-driven design, where we are leveraging the bus. You got your service bus. I've done a lot with TIBCO because I was dealing with a lot of financial institutions and banks and government, and everything had to be TIBCO and secured. So it was interesting. One of the places I worked at was Major League Baseball. And we did the little ticker tape that you see at the bottom of ESPN that gives you the stats. We wrote that for Sportsnet in New Jersey. So Mr. Elias, who was at the time 89 years old, knew more than the mainframe did. Okay, he could spat out details like that about baseball because he met all the players. He knew them all, Babe Ruth, all of them. So, but we tried to bring that and capture his into something that you now see today. So that's the kind of legacy things that you have to deal with, because one man's knowledge was better than the mainframe. So how did you get that one man's knowledge out and put it where people can share it? And that was one of our early approaches. So we used a lot of different techniques now that you call DDD, but Mr. Elias was the domain. Okay, he was the domain. We had to break him out. So that's kind of the things we're going to get into. And what I'm going to show you now is your typical SOA application. This is how you built them years ago with like the three-tier architectures. You had a database, you had a service layer, and then you had a UI component. These are typically what we see when people were building with Cold Fusion, ASP, JSP, all the different type of technologies at the time. And that was what everybody thought was the right architecture. Well, unfortunately, that meant you were very tightly coupled, and you couldn't realistically expand, change, modify, grow, take advantage of new technologies as they came out. So what we look at now is if you want to get into a domain-driven type design, you almost have to look at it this way now. The database is going to be pretty much on its own, and you're going to look at your domain as the primary areas that you want to have. And it's not one domain, it's multiple domains, and multiple domains with subdomains. So you'll start looking at that and start coming, but you need to think high level first and concentrate on what is a domain, what do I need to do to identify that, and then you put an application and a UI around it. That's the first step. And here's an example of what people do when they think of a domain. Whoops, let's go back here. It's not going forward. They have the BFF, and it's not best friends forever. It's back ends for front ends, okay? So you have to look at that. This is where they start breaking things out, and they think, okay, I'll just come to this approach. I'm going to create a BFF, and then I'll start breaking things out into pieces back here. But that's really not your domain. That's really not where you're headed. But it might be a good first start, but now you have everything in your BFF. And trying to get that to work with your web application, you've got this monolith, but you don't have an easy way to break it up into teams. Who can do what where? It's like, well, who has what responsibility? Who's supposed to make sure that this works? Then you got your integration issues. How do we put all of this together and deploy it? So now you don't really have your domain thought out. You just got this great big BFF, and that's what you have. So one of the things that we start looking at was the next step, where you started building REST services around those. And that's a quasi-domain, if you think about it. You're trying to break them out and have things set up where you can actually do that. And you can look at the orders, shipping, sales, and billing as your domains, and you put REST services around them to start calling them, and they're used by a web application. So that might be all and good, but now your web application isn't set up to be easily changed either, because now it's one great big mass of HTML code, and you haven't thought, well, how does that fit with my domain? Who's responsible for making changes when I make a change to my domain? So the idea behind that is to start breaking out your web applications into composition UIs, or component UI pieces, where you're going to composite UIs, I guess is the best way for me to put it. And in the newer technologies like Angular, Vue.js, some of these other ones that a lot of people use, React is another one, you start separating your teams into building these UI components. So you may have a domain that you have, say, let's take it orders. So orders is going to start being responsible for everything orders needs to do. That includes the UI component, what information comes in and out. That's where I want to be careful not to call them business components, because actually BC is the bounding context around your domains. So you start looking at how to break that up, and that's the hard part. What is it that our business does? And that's one of the things where project managers or product managers struggle with, because a lot of times the domain experts aren't even involved in the development of your domains. They tell you what they want, and then you go off and build it. Well, you can't have that anymore when you're dealing with domain. You really need to have your domain experts working with you along with the teams to get this done. So we spoke about UI composition, and this is where we were getting into building the UI components. Composite UI components is what we call them. That's the self-contained, aware, communicating in and out pieces of the software that you have. And here's kind of what we're dealing. We're going to start building them on top of frameworks. And the frameworks, like I mentioned, were Angular, React, and going down that route. So by doing that, you'll also notice we added the service bus. And this is where we're getting into the distributed domain-driven design, where we're going to start having communication between our domains and sending information out based on our contracts. What we decide is going to be our bounding context. So you build contracts that say, hey, if you want this information, this is what I'm going to expose out of my domain. I will put this out there so that you other domains can understand what's going on and leverage that. So when you call me back wanting information or have something happen, you can leverage it through these particular ideas. We're not going to be passing value objects that are huge like a lot of people do. I want everything. Well, in today's world, you almost have to limit what people can see, because you're responsible for your domain, and you don't want to have a trail of stale data going across these other domains. So we tend to leverage the service bus for this, and we found that you get a lot of reliability out of that. Things aren't lost. Messages are queued up and able to be replayed, not just in the database, but we've had situations where we built a QRS system for med assets, and they were able to recreate their entire database from old messages. They just simply replayed them from day one. And so that was a nice attribute for that, but those are specific type of targets that you have to determine.
Did you do that from, say, a regular message queue?
At that time, we were using NService Bus, but I've actually worked with MSMQ, TIBCO, JMS and the Java world, I'm Java certified, so I've done the JMS. There's all different messaging systems, ActiveMQ, there's so many out there, and I've had to work with them. But essentially, yes, what we did is we leveraged the bus to do the communication between different domains because we didn't want the domains to be tightly coupled to another domain.
Of the messages, if you want to reconstruct
Yeah.
the state, could you do that with the messages, say from RabbitMQ?
Yeah.
Because I haven't used it that way.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's no reason why you couldn't do that. Most of the messages are first in, first out. Depends on how they come in. So your oldest messages get played into the newer ones. And yeah, you can replay a whole system, provided that you haven't changed the way the messages are handled. And you have to version your messages to prevent that. That's one of the other things to do. But yeah, we deal with message versioning all the time, don't we? And it can get complicated. But basically, we want to see the UI as a service. And that's what I was getting about, composite UI, UI composition. You need to think of them as their own individual service. And they talk to their own domains. They're not worried about communicating with everybody else's domain. They deal with their own thing. And we're going to get into a perfect example of that, and I'm sure all of you have dealt with Amazon. Okay? And Amazon is basically that to a T. They build their UI compositions, and they all speak to their own domains. So to give you an idea, here is an example of how they broke out their domains. You got the shipping, sales, billing, and notice that there's multiple UI components in this that are created by those domains. You see a couple of sales, a couple of billing, and a couple of shipping. And those all communicate and they pass around IDs to each other. They don't have the whole data. They just have, hey, I've got this order number, I've got this customer number, I've got this billing, and that's what they pass around and communicate with. And that is where you want to try to start targeting your domain-driven design. You want to take a look at the whole picture and not just, well, I've got this back-end piece. You have to look at them as all pieces that have to come together.
So, for the sake of understanding of people, when you say they all communicate through IDs, could you stress on that part? The reason I'm saying is we have project managers, and we have some of the people who haven't been in
Sure.
ADD so much.
Right. So in this particular case, when you put a record in a database, it's given a key, an ID or a key. And it identifies that unique record so you know whose information that is. So when we deal with IDs in the DDD world, we are giving you that key, that reference to that information.
And the order ID and the item ID, right?
Right. It could be items within an order. And all of that information, now you may not get to see the items ID, but you'll get to see the order ID, which you can pass into the order domain to the UI component and says, hey, for this order, can you please load the details of this order? And it will take that ID associated to a customer, because they'll probably have that ID, and load that up. And you'll just see that in that domain's composite UI component. And that's the whole idea. You just said, hey, I need this. Okay?
Can you go back to the other picture you had?
Sure. This one here?
No, the one before that.
This one here?
So you said we have different domains.
Yes.
So you have an order domain,
Shipping domain, sales, and billing.
domain. And what were you saying about the IDs that get passed?
So in other words, if we have, by the use of the service bus, we can publish an event that says, hey, I've created an order for this billing user's ID or this customer's ID, and here's their billing ID. So it will have an order. You can send that out and say, okay, shipping needs to know about the order, billing needs to know about the order because it needs to know what to bill, and then it will go through and say, okay, this information I need to bill, how much were all the products, boom, this is for that order. So by having those primary keys or keys that are important, it can now go talk to the various UI development domains themselves, the components, and say, hey, when you're doing this, load up this for me so I can see it. And then those domains will go back and load up the information to display it.
So it's like a database with application attached to each table?
Each domain will have probably their own database that they're responsible for, but you as the consumer won't see the database. You'll see probably just the UI object itself display it. But you, as an overall manager of that information, will pass out whatever IDs you have from the various things that the people have ordered, their shipping information, their billing address, what have you, and you'll pass those IDs down to these components, and they'll do the work for you. And that's where the role of responsibility is separated. So,
I'm trying to visualize this on here. Let's say you made an order, so you
Yep.
on your web application, you place an order.
well, I've got a chart. We can go right to that. How's that? All right. Here's an example here. So I've got an order submitted, exactly right there, and the order is received for a customer. Okay, and you can see that the message patterns are going in and out. So sales says, hey, here's an order received, order received, order received to the other three domains. So customer gets an order received from sales, shipping gets the order received from sales, and billing gets the order received from sales. And because of that, they've got the IDs. So now they can say, customer has an order, customer has shipping, customer has billing. And they can take those information and store them into their own systems without having everything about a sale. So they can go back and query sale and say, hey, I need this information about a sale. Can you display that for me? Give me the total. And then they'll send them a total instead of all the individual line items in a bill. So for instance, sales may have to have multiple tax calculations based on the state. Well, as shipping, I don't care about that. Just tell me where I have to ship it to. So that's what it gets to. Go ahead.
So you're saying that this way you're not only like composing UI in different sections and keeping them independent of each other.
Correct.
But at the same time, the data that serves those individual pieces is in their own individual database and independent of these other
Domains.
domains.
Correct.
Database, for example, the database that serves the sales has only sales information.
Correct.
The database that serves order has order database, but the communication is happening through these IDs.
Right.
Floating around in these different domains.
Right. Because a lot of times what the older applications do is they would send you everything. And you would keep a track out of it. And if anything ever happened, then that information could be stale. So because I am the one that is responsible for, in this case, let's just say customer, I know everything about customer. I know how to display its information. I know how to present it. I can give you multiple UI components to put on the UI front end. We built it using whatever framework you have, and that's the nice thing. I can have multiple frameworks. My back end and my domain can be whatever, and if I need to support multiple front ends, then I can just build a UI component, composite UI component that you can display based on your framework.
So the domain driven design, is that also, so it's reflected all the way to database?
Yep.
So if I had to think about the advantage of keeping these databases separate for the specific domains, what would happen?
Well, the first thing is they are a single role of responsibility. You usually have your domain experts help you design your database, what information needs to be saved, what the business requires, and that's the big thing. It's not a technical decision on what's the database, it's a business decision. You have to have your business domain experts explain to you what information needs to be saved. And not everybody needs to know that. There are times when that information needs to be protected, encrypted, and you don't want just anybody to get to it. So for instance, customer information, there may be PII in that, and it has to be encrypted. Well, I don't want that PII, private information. Yeah, personally identifiable information, PII. And that could be credit card numbers, that could be anything that would identify that person. That cannot be shared by anybody else. So I would not let shipping or billing or sales know anything about that, because I have a federal requirement that says this information must be protected. So in the old systems, you would have all of those customer, shipping, billing, and sales all in one database. And that got to be a problem where anybody broke in one, they got the whole thing. So that's why you try to separate into domains, is to have whatever has to be protected can be protected. What people have to know, you create that in what they call a contract. Your bounding context determines what information gets in and out. And that's what you get to. So that's why you want to start thinking about these applications as what is the business role that I'm looking for these to provide. Okay, it's a business function is technically what we would call it.
What are the business roles these domains provide?
Well, that depends on the
Or what did you say?
I'm sorry.
What did you say about what is the business role?
Right. So, for instance, the customer domain has certain business functions that it provides. Its role is to handle everything customer related, creating a customer account. It could be, name, address, identifying the types of address, information that they need to identify a customer ID. Whenever you go to Amazon, you have your own customer account ID. So things like that. And that's its role of responsibility. I do customer well, and I know everything about my customer because the business has told me what I need to do to handle customers. Then the business will come in and say, hey, we do shipping this way. We use X, Y, and Z to do our shipping. We don't use DHL. So the business is saying these are your shipping options. And it defines that because that's what the business says needs to be done. Now, you may later on come out and say, I'll add DHL, but that's at the shipping. Nobody else needs to know that. When you present the shipping options, you just get to pick it. And that's what these other guys say, hey, I need shipping. So when I present your final summary, it gives you the chance to choose your shipping. They don't care. They just want the ID. So when they bring it back up, they'll be able to tell you which shipping option you chose. DHL is just like FedEx. It's like the UPS. It's just they do a lot of international from Asia and China, Taiwan, Japan. I mean, they do a lot of international, but that's just an example. Okay? So that's basically what we get to. And then this next scene shows you all of the communications back and forth, how things are done. I might have multiple. I might come back and say, oh, you know what? I'm on Amazon. I got an hour to cancel my order. I cancel the order. And then they'll go back and they'll take a look and say, well, there may be a business rule in billing and sales and customer and shipping that says, hey, you've only got 20-minute window. You can't try to cancel an hour. Sorry, we can't do it. And they'll send out an event saying what the reason why they would not accept it. Have you ever ordered something on Amazon, maybe go on 2 or 3 hours later and try to cancel it? And they say, oh, it's too late. We already shipped. You'll have to contact the retailer. So that's the kind of idea. That's why you need to be able to have these type of communications set up separately so you can communicate back and forth. So that's just the basic idea. So we'll go down to the next one, and then you can see how all of those pertain to the UI components and how the back end works. And that's where the composite UI and UI composition comes in. And that's a perfect example. Amazon's probably done this for, well, really since they came out, but I think they were using REST services at the time. They were building services around that and built UI components. I think it was JSP. I think the early stuff was. I don't know what they're doing right now, but you want me to straighten that out? The TV? Okay. So one of the things that you have to ask yourself, and this is where your binding contract contexts come in and your models come in, is what information does the SOA need? And that is specific to the system. And here's an example of probably a very heavy object being sent back and forth. Does collections really need all that information or not? And that's what you have to find out. And that's where, when you get into domain-driven design, you have to really start working through and looking for leaky types of data, because sometimes you're sending more than you really need. The contracts need to be focused around a minimal amount of data. And
Do you like the word leak?
yeah,
used here?
yeah.
Because it's like,
What was leaky on the?
Well, there was a lot leaky on this last one, a lot leaky. So for instance, do I need the fee amount, loan terms? Do I really need load terms for collection? I just need to know I have to collect an amount, right? I need to know the loan and the amount and when the payment was due. How many times did they miss payments? I don't think I need to know that. I just need to know that I have to collect this amount and who the loan's for. Maybe I need to know what the remaining balance is, but do I need to know the original loan amount? Probably not. I just need to know what I can collect. So that's an example of a leaky message, leaky information. There's too much there that payments is sending to collections. Collections doesn't need to know that. And myself, as the payments domain, I'm only going to have to give you minimal amount of data. And we'll show an example of that as I go on.
Oh, so before you even had those domains, sending the whole chunk of customer plus billing plus
That happened all the time.
super leaky then.
Super leaky, yes, ma'am. That's exactly right. So in the original setup where I showed you where everything was together, you would pass this great big value object, and inside this value object would have the billing, the customer, the address. It would have the loan. It would have everything sent as this great big object.
And then the term for it, that's called unified model, right?
Yeah, unified model. That's exactly right. Which I don't do anymore. Yeah, I haven't done that in probably 10, 15 years. So, but back then that was called, let's see, RUP. We had, I think it was RUP is what it was called officially.
Rapid something process.
Yeah, it was. It's where all the great minds at the time decided to come together with IBM and come up with their own architectural design. You had Jacobson, Bush, some of the others. Yes.
It also reminds me of the so-called enterprise bus,
Oh,
where they wanted to put everything
on the bus. Everything on the bus. Well, that actually happened with Tibco. I won't name the company, but they make lenses for eyeglasses, and they were using Tibco's software to design, and they put everything on the Tibco bus. Everything on the Tibco bus. They passed all this stuff on, and they couldn't understand why the system was slow. So we went in there. Jason and I worked at the same company at the time, AI. And I went to this company and we looked at it, and I told them, I said, who said to do it this way? And they said, well, Tibco came in and taught us, and it was like $500 an hour for their consultants, and they built this. And I'm like, you do understand why this thing's running slow, right? And they're like, well, why is it running slow? I said, because you're putting everything on the bus, and you don't have the infrastructure to support millions of bytes of data flying across thousands of messages. I said, they're all colluding and colliding and not getting anything done. So I spent a while there, but we tried to get them, but they were all hung up on Tibco. And I couldn't get them to understand that. So what we did is we built them one that was under JMS and showed them how a smaller set of data and all would work. And then we would throw it on communications for Tibco. And that's where we left it. But yeah, it was... That's an example. You think you need the world, and you only really need, a sentence, and that's the way to look at it. So this is an example of where there's too much data, and so what needs data, or is it users need the data? And you have to understand that there's a big difference between what users need and what your domains need, and they're not the same. They're actually different. So that's also being able to identify what is displayed. So a lot of times what the users want to see, I want all the data. Well, each domain can be responsible for their section of data and allow the user to see that, and then they can communicate back and forth. I use a lot of Angular, so we'll do events to communicate between components, especially now. So they can do and load up what they want. So some user selects something from here, an event will raise, they'll listen for the event, and they'll take an action. It's a lot easier doing that rather than hardwiring everything together. So when you build your composite UI components, they are meant to be individual. They can go anywhere. They're not meant to be on a single page. They could be on multiple pages, multiple apps. And by setting it up that way, you can now leverage your domains in multiple places. Maybe the executives want a report summary. Well, they don't care about all the other minutiae. They just want the summaries. So you would have a composite UI component from your domain that's strictly tailored to that. All the data is available. So that's the way you have to look at it. You have to start breaking.
What makes the UI component as a composite UI component composite?
What a composite UI component means, it is an individual control, if you will, that specializes in the task at hand. Are you familiar with task-based UIs? A task-based UI says, I am going to make this action occur. Okay, I want to edit an address. I want to edit an email. Those are task-based UI approaches. So you may come in and say, okay, I'm going to get on this. I present you this information. I need to change my city. So you'll click on task-based UI and it says, okay, what do you want the city to be? Type it in, done. So it could be like an edit component. So you want each of your composite UI components to be tailored to what they do alone. You don't want to have a whole bunch of everything into one component. You want to break them down. So you'll look.
The things that were in the web app, like the shipping UI, that's a composite.
That is a composite UI component. It's tailored to that particular task. And notice there were two of that particular type of domains components. So let me back up and we'll show you. Notice that there's a shipping, there's two shippings, there's two sales, there's two billing. Each of those are a UI component from the domain that specializes in the task at hand. They are responsible for those items. And all they did was simply put them together and link them with events that use the IDs. And they communicate that way.
So you have, why two of each? Is it one for?
They broke them up because one side of the billing, I can't see that one there, might show a total. The other side of the billing might show your addresses that you can choose from, that kind of thing, for your billing address.
It's just kind of the way it turned out. There's no
Yeah.
particular reason for their.
Yeah, it's just how Amazon decided they wanted to break it up. It's not I always do that for my business, but this is how they broke it up.
So they could have put all the yellows together, put all the.
But they didn't because they wanted to break out its role of responsibility. Remember, it's a single role of responsibility. It's one of the solid principles. So if you think of solid principles, there's single role of responsibility. There's open and closed principle, which means I'm open for extension, but not change. In other words, my component is doing this. If you want to extend it, you do the open close principle. Then there's Liskov substitution principle, which says I can take a like component and swap it out, and it will do the same job for me without breaking the system. Then you have inversion of control, which means I will inject what I want you to do into what has to be done. So in other words, you will create, for instance, I might create a customer service provider. I inject that into the customer service domain, and it would therefore have the responsibility of taking care of, say, I'm creating a customer. Okay, so that's the idea behind inversion of control. I created a provider or a service that does this for me, and I inject it into my domain. And then there's dependency injection, which is generally, I call it interface-based design, because that's really what it is. I'm defining an interface that says, here's the roles and responsibilities I will provide. This is my legal contract to you that I will fulfill. So if you think of writing a contract, you detail all the terms and conditions, and that is what you get when you do a interface.
For example, in the service, you don't want to have one that has both shipping and sales.
Correct.
In there. You can have two interfaces and then implement whichever one you want.
Right.
Based on the contract they're trying to implement.
Right. Each business may come up with, say, all of you will provide X type of information, but how you implement is different. And a great example of that is a repository. Everybody's got a different way of accessing a table, but I give you a common approach to how you do this. An add, update, delete, select filtered. So that's my contract. This is our repository. And then I can create a repository for each data table or view or store procedure that handles those particular responsibilities. And you'll see a lot of that in your domains. You'll see a lot of repositories. You'll see a lot of services. You'll see providers. And they'll all be generally interface contracts. So you can do easy substitutions. And that's where the list call substitution comes in. So believe it or not everybody they do that, but they don't understand that it's a solids principle. But they do it because it makes sense. And solid's been around 20, 25 years. And that's one of the first practical uses of software architecture that I learned was the solid principles. And even my unit tests, if you look at them, are exactly like that. All of them are single role responsibility. They do one thing. And we use mocks a lot. That's a technical software that allows us to mock up. I mocked up an entire system on interfaces with no code behind it to do a proof of concept. And the reason why I did that is I didn't want the management team to think it was done. Because that's what happens. So.
Code actually takes each chapter on one solid principle.
Yes.
It's that important that the book has divided it into its own chapters.
Right, yeah. So, yeah, it's probably one of the big benefits to do with domain-driven design is to leverage the solid principles, because it'll help you leverage teams and give them the ability to do their own types of work. And that's why I'm a big fan of doing it that way. Agile is great, but it has its limitations. Even domain-driven design can be very difficult to implement if you have a very technical solution that's complicated. And you have to be able to discern, and it may not be what I have to do now. You may have to evolve into that, because the system is so complex that it's difficult to get the domain-driven design to work. It's not a magic hammer. It's not, I've got this nail and I've got this 500-pound hammer, everything's a nail. And too many people do that. I mean, they did that with CQRS, they did that with Agile, they did that with Kanban. You know, the flavor of the month is, oh, this is going to solve all our problems. Well, yes and no. So you have to be able to discern that. And I'm showing you this to kind of give you an idea of where the thought process has to go, because you want to break away from a monolith, which is most legacy applications. They're monoliths. Everything's tied together and coupled. And I'm going to get into some techniques that I used, I guess we started using about 15 years ago. They're called wraps, swaps, and sprouts. What a wrap does is allow you to wrap up technology or functionality that you want to eventually change. So you create a wrap around that area of code or that particular application or what have you, and you start to isolate it. And that's where the solid principles start coming in. That's that single role responsibility. I'm going to break this out. I'm going to turn this into an interface-based design, and I'm going to identify its inputs and outputs. So I'm going to build a wrap around it. What a swap is I've made some changes. We have to do some updates. So now that I've got this interface here and I've got my contract defined, I can use list call substitution principle and start making my swap. Okay, I'm making some changes. Sprouts are new functionality I want to introduce into a legacy or new system. But I have to isolate the legacy stuff. So that's where the wrap comes in first. I swap out certain functionality, and now I'm going to sprout and I'm going to do new functionality. So those are the three terms that you use for legacy, is wrap first, swap, and sprout. Okay? And those are really technical, the technical terms for doing that type of legacy integration. Yes?
I read some of this in Working Effectively with Legacy Code.
That's a book that's been around for 10, 12 years.
Yes.
So I probably learned to do that. Really, we didn't have a name for it till that book came out. But that's what we technically did then, was to do exactly that. And yeah. 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 It's
So much of our work.
It is.
So much is it?
Very few people get the opportunity to do greenfield projects. They're usually brownfield or very few. So most of my career has been legacy integrations. It really has. So I went to, just a side story to give you an idea, I went to Ambit Energy in downtown Dallas. I was working there for a couple of years as a contract. And they had a system that the CIO wrote 6 years ago. Everything was in SQL Server. Everything. The whole business logic, the whole processing, everything. So they had no way to get out customer usage in an email. So there was no way to get it out. And they needed to get information from ERCOT, who's in the state of Texas, takes care of your electrical usage every 15 minutes. So they needed to give people that information. So we looked at that and said, there's no way. We're going to have to put a wrap around that code if we're going to even work on it. So we built a wrap. Then we swapped out the SQL Server business logic into a bus layer. And at the time, we were using an ActiveMQ. And then we did sprouts. We did brand new code. And we used SQL Server, 250,000 tables. We broke them out so the customers could have their own table. And the reason why we did that is because we didn't have to use indexes. Because when you're indexing millions of clients, the indexes slow it down. So we leveraged an ability to use GUIDs, and we sequenced them. And we were processing 1 billion rows an hour. 1 billion rows an hour. And sticking in SQL Server. And they would use that through a web service all done through ActiveMQ because they didn't have end service bus license. We built 4 servers. That's all it was. And we just shoot these messages, and they would process it, put it in SQL Server, and then they built a web service that generated the emails. And we did that in 5 months. It took them 3 years with the SQL, and they couldn't get it out, but we were able to get it out in 5 months. So that's an example of how you deal with a legacy system. We took that data that they had and brought it out, and we broke it up by client. We had 250,000 tables, and we had a master table that managed where our clients were, and it was seconds, literally milliseconds to get that done. Microsoft came in and was going to send them their $750,000 high-speed powered Microsoft enterprise system with Hadoop, and they're going to teach everybody Hadoop. And we looked at the time frame, and it was going to be a year and a half with that because Microsoft wanted to be there to train. So, one of the old sayings when I went to Microsoft was, we want to penetrate and radiate. We want to get in, and then Windows everywhere. And that's kind of what happened. So, but on a sidetrack, but that gives to show you why you want to start breaking things up and start thinking about your systems and how you're going to have to integrate them, because legacy systems is what everybody has to deal with. Everybody, I don't care. The only ones that don't are the new companies, and even then, they wrote it so fast that it's probably going to have to be redone later because they were trying to get to first on the market. So I've seen quite a bit of that. Please?
Their most viable product?
Yeah, MVP. That's right. So, we were talking about what data does the system need. We got through that. We talked about this. The server-side composition, this is what we were talking about, where you break everything up and have teams be responsible for certain types of domains. Now, this is kind of jumping ahead. This is assuming that you've already defined what your domains are. But that's really the hardest part, is defining your domains. And we've got some techniques in here that we've learned over the years that really help. And, this is just the notes. We can send out this slide later, but I'll get that to you. But this is basically what you have to think about, breaking out your composite UI, your UI patterns, where web teams are responsible for this, but they're usually in the domain. Most of your development code each domain is responsible for it. So I can belabor that a little bit, but essentially it's the domains are responsible for developing what UI they have to have. And we got to the different side on the client side. So, you've got your back ends, your front ends. Everybody knows what they're supposed to do. The teams are responsible. But your bounding context and your contracts are the most important things that you have when it comes with the domain. It's how you bounding context and contracts. So my contracts are saying what information I'm going to leak, if you will. It's usually very small. So it's just enough to identify what I need to have done, and that's what you want to do.
Oh, so they're two different things then?
Bounding context is what my domain is responsible for. This is what I'm going to have to do. How do you explain it, Jason? Pretty much the same way?
It's the clear boundaries set
Yes.
around your models of
Right.
of your domain. So
Yeah.
you know how that image was, you had shipping and you
Yes.
had sales and you had orders. You have very clear boundaries around them,
Mm-hmm.
and they own what they do, and they don't own anything else.
Correct.
So that's what bounded context is.
Right. And then there's models and contracts derived inside of that. And the contracts tell you how you communicate with my bounding context. This is the information in and out. This is what you can send me. This is what I'll send out. And a lot of times those are either commands or events. Sometimes they're messages. Mostly it's commands and events.
So I really remember this definition of DDD, and it said DDD is an approach to developing software for complex business needs in a way that the software is adaptable to change, and then it talks about that the models, the domain models are, they have your data,
Mm-hmm.
and the process that operates on that together with clear boundaries set around that responsibility.
Right.
And that is
And what you said is important. It's clear boundaries. And that all gets back to what they call a ubiquitous language, where everybody knows what that domain's language is. You basically define the language with the team. And you say that when we communicate, when we speak, we use this ubiquitous language. When I say it's this, it's this. Now, what another domain may have a totally different language. They're not all the same. but you have to have that clearly defined, because that's why I said a lot of people start talking about the application. I've got this application X does it, and that's not what you need, because that is specific to an application. It doesn't necessarily mean that's what the domain does, and it certainly doesn't mean that's the business. I do it that way because we wrote the application. Yeah.
You said contracts are mostly commands and what else?
Well, contracts can be your information you're passing forth, and I said those are usually passed via commands and events, your contracts.
So I will give you the resources. If you want to, like, I'll give you like all the resources, that this material, you could learn some of these terms, if you want that.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend that.
So the models are different than the contracts then?
In a lot of ways, yes. In fact, they will be different. Your models are your domain models. This is the information that I may use for putting data in a database or a repository. It may be information I pass inter-domain from one service to another. It could be what I leverage in an intra-message communication. I may have multiple services inside. Let's say I'm using an N-service bus. I may have multiple endpoints, and I send the information communicating between them, but they're all contained within the domain. That's another way of using models, but we generally use commands for those. Yes?
It seems to me that it's kind of like extrapolating the concept of encapsulation.
Yes, right. If you're thinking of OOP and OOA and OOD, object-oriented design and all that, yes, it's pretty much, like I said, a lot of things that are old are new again, and DDD does take that concept. It just expounds on it. But the encapsulation, the difference is you won't find the model and the business in a single encapsulation.
Right.
You actually separate them.
The key thing is that it's kind of driven by the business
Yep.
rather than driven by how the programmer looks at it.
Right, yeah, and Bush's term, he used to call them behavioral. You built behavioral classes. These are the behaviors that I'm giving you, and these are the contracts in and out. Okay, and I encapsulate the data, but my external contract to you is this. So you're seeing the same thing. I mean, the behavioral approach that Bush had is a lot of what you're seeing in domain-driven design, except they split it out, where the behaviorals don't also encapsulate the data. They are really more simply, they just execute, and you give them inputs and outputs. You can also think of functional programming like that. Functional programming is a lot like that. Functional programming takes a contract, does some action, and spits out a result. But you don't know what that functional contract is inside. And I may pass you that function. I may say, hey, calculate. Well, I've got the state of California, so I'm going to give you the calculation routine. You execute it with this data and send it back, and then this guy will handle the calculations in a unified manner and spit it out. So you'll see a lot of that, but I don't want to get into functional programming because it can get wildy and just a technical implementation detail. So, but these, like I said, these are the UI pattern frameworks. I tend to use Angular and Vue.js. That's the ones that one of the reasons why I use Vue.js is it's very Angular 1-like. And when I go into clients who have Angular 1 and saw what Angular 2 took, and they go, oh my God, I don't want to upgrade, then I look at Vue.js for that because it's very similar. It gives you the ability to use what Angular 7 provides, which is the TypeScript, which is nice, but a lot of people want to transition, so they'll do that.
So I have a question on that.
Sure.
I'm a fan of Angular too.
Yeah, I've used it since the first days.
It's a really good pattern around building software.
Right.
But for somebody who wants to go the React way, what are you going to tell them if you have,
The hard argument for React is if you look at Vue.js, it's very React-like too. So I don't pick one. If I come in and they don't have one, then I'm going to pick Angular because it really is a very mature. I like the way that I can build composite UI components. In fact, I will build libraries and put my components in a library. And this is where it leverages so well with domain-driven design. One of the bank clients that we had, I did that. We created a bootstrapper for them in Angular and allowed them to generate composite UI libraries specific to the domains that they were working on. And we would standardize on what the business wanted from a look and feel. So we had a base library that was a composite UI, They would inherit that, build their components, and then they could take these components and put it in any application. And these components leveraged the domain in the back. So we built services inside these UI components that knew how to communicate with the domain. And we would probably we leverage Signal R when we had to do things on the bus, so they would know how to communicate with that. And it just makes it so much nicer for teams when you can separate that. We built a whole set of Jasmine and a EDE test. We were able to test the entire system doing it that way. So when you start looking at that, what's that? Oh yeah, you will. No, they all have it, but Angular specifically gives you some great tools. And Microsoft has Visual Code, which is free, that leverages that to a T with Angular. And it makes team communication and development of these so nice. So I use Visual Code over Visual Studio when I'm doing this with UI work.
What's the first one?
That's React.
Okay.
React, Angular, and Visual.js. Or Vue.js, I'm sorry, Vue.js.
What do you like about the Vue?
Well,
You said it was like
Angular 1, when I'm dealing with clients that have Angular 1 code, and if you've ever had to do an Angular 1 to Angular 2 or later, you will cringe. You will cringe.
5 of my apps are now on Angular 1, and they have to be upgraded.
And it's now Angular, Google had a bridge for Angular 1 to Angular 2 to help you get there. And then they also have a tool, which I don't know if they still have it out now, that allows you to leverage Angular 2 code in your Angular 1 while you migrate. I got to be honest, I found it easier just to start from scratch.
They just rewrite.
Mhm.
It's like a complete rewrite.
Yeah, it is so hard to take what they have and move it because everything about the architecture has changed. The scope, the root scope, how it communicates. One of the biggest problems with Angular 1 was the scope. It would get so big that it would slow down the app because everyone was putting things on scope and didn't understand what it was doing to the heap and how it crashed. So they were trying to do too much with it.
They upgrade so frequently, and every 6 months.
Yeah.
So we have to upgrade.
Yeah, so from 5 to 6, 6 to 7, and 7 to 8, the upgrade's not bad. But from 2 to 5, it's still painful. So when I go in, if somebody's got something, I look at it and I'm like, let's go to the latest if they can. But if they have to do an incremental upgrade, then you have to do that. But it's generally, I hate telling people this, but it generally is a rewrite because so much of the work, you would spend more time trying to get it to work than it would just be. Right, but you can leverage the code and just break it out like I was showing you earlier. That's where you get your sprouts, your wraps, and your swaps in so you can start doing that and start isolating what that code's doing. Because a lot of times I'll go in and I'm looking at the controller in an Angular app and everything is in the controller. All the business logic, all the service calls, they didn't break it out into the single role responsibility. So that's usually the first thing, and that's where the wraps come in. I'll look at an Angular 1 and say, okay, if we're going to have to upgrade, let's first do this the way it should be. Let's break these out into the providers. Let's break them out into the things that the later versions of Angular support. Okay, your factories, and start building the services. So you start breaking those out, and you put your wrap in that area. So now this code is isolated. It can be turned into TypeScript. You can use the bridge that Angular has, and now I've already started moving towards TypeScript. And that's the slow approach that you have to do. It can be done, but most of the time they want it tomorrow, or yesterday is usually it. But yeah, that's.
If you're learning Angular or reviewing it, would it be better to go with 2 or?
Don't even mess with 2. Don't even mess with 2. 2 was their initial step, and they learned a lot from what not to do, that they brought out 3. And then there's things that they did in 3. Then 4 started to stabilize a little bit better. So 4 was probably, if I had to start from 1, I'd probably go 1 to 4.
So,
Yep.
okay, 1 and then 4.
1 to 4.
Or rewrite it.
Or rewrite it. Right, exactly.
Use the latest.
You mean you would go 1, 2, 3, 4?
Nope, I'd say go 1 and then skip 2 and 3 and go to 4.
She's asking about learning the code. I
Oh,
think.
learning the
You're
code?
answering the question about moving.
Moving. Yeah, if you're going to learn, start with Angular 8.
Yeah, it's Angular 8 is
Yeah, that's the latest. 7 and 8. There's a lot of 7 out. A lot of people have 7, but it's 8. I misinterpreted what I thought you were saying. Well, what do you do about legacy code? Because that's kind of what we're.
She said the word learned very softly.
Oh, okay.
So we say beside
Okay.
that's the only reason. Yeah.
Yeah, but if you're going to learn, you're going to go right to 8. You're not even going to bother with the old ones unless you have to
To support.
support it.
To legacy.
Yep. Legacy, and I'm still doing stuff from ASP.NET days. Okay? Nobody, and MVC, I would not do anything in MVC anymore. That's just me. Because the frameworks are so much better. What's that? Yeah, ASP.NET, even ASP. Still some old apps.
I thought MVC was like a way of doing things.
It is. You can get into areas with MVC. That's kind of like breaking up domains. I prefer to use the UI for the UI. And the UI frameworks are so good today that I tend to use services where I need, but I myself shy away from MVC.
And that's exactly what I'm doing. I have Angular, the
Yeah.
UI separate, and then I have the APIs, and it's all core.
Yep.
There's no one going back to the .NET framework and API.
No, everything I do is either .NET Standard or .NET Core. Now we're getting into the guts of technical implementation, but
Honestly, when if you learned Angular way back when it started, they were like MVC models.
yeah, I know. I learned it day one, and then I had to unlearn it in Angular 2. So when I looked at what they did, it was like, oh my God, it's so changed. I'm going with Vue.js. So I did a lot of Vue.js because it was an easier transition for a lot of clients. So it all depends. Okay. But we're good into integration leaks, which is what we were talking about. So I'm dealing with a legacy system, and I've got to find a way to communicate with my domains and be able to do what I need to do. And all of us have legacy systems. The one caveat I would make with this is sometimes the legacy systems are very difficult to break up and do things. But you want to try and do that. So what's my first attempt? I create a legacy shim. That's what we call them, legacy shim. One whole great big shim that all the domains start using in a legacy system. So there's a problem with that, is I don't know who's responsible for the various areas in my legacy that I need. So you see I've got a customer domain and a shipping domain, but I've got one legacy shim. So who's responsible for handling customer and who's responsible for handling shipping? If I have a legacy shim like that, I'm going to have all kinds of trouble, and this is what we're getting into. It's unclear who owns it. It's difficult to version. How do I version a legacy shim? I have to send a whole thing, and I can't version certain pieces. What if I only want to make a change to the customer? Well, I have to ship the whole thing when I make one legacy shim. You can't retire a legacy shim. Like I was saying, swaps, wraps, and sprouts. If I want to do a sprout and I've got a single legacy shim, how in the world do I do anything new? So that's where you get into. And this is where I was talking about leakiness. You tend to get too much information across the bounding context between the two domains. In other words, I'm shipping all of it here, and I'm shipping all of it here. And now I've got to try to keep this fresh. And what if I don't get this change here? Well, I'm dealing with outdated code or outdated data. But he's got the new stuff, and now my system's not working correctly.
What's the legacy system?
The gray box, just legacy system.
And what is BCs?
Bounding context. Yeah, so in other words, your bounding context, this is what my particular domain is going to be responsible for. It's like what Conti was saying earlier, is that. And that's where we get here. What we're going to look at when we start building legacy shims is we're going to actually talk and look at a way that we can start splitting these up. And that's where the difficulty comes in with some of these really tightly coupled legacy systems. So that's why I bring up the whole idea behind the sprouts, swaps, and wraps. Is so you can start looking at ways to do this. And the first thing is to start building a wrap. And when you start building a wrap, then you can start looking at ways to set these aside. You define your data contracts in and out, and then your legacy shim can start doing what it has to. And this is where I think the legacy shims come in real handy. Is now I can define who owns it. I can now version these. I can retire one when I have my new Sprout. I'm going to plug in my Sprout, retire this legacy system because we were able to migrate it. And the screens that are associated with the shims are retired. So now I've got this entire piece that I've shimmed based on my domain. And now I've got this this new Sprout. I'm going to swap that and plug this in. And then all the UI that went with that goes in. And you just retire the old system. This evolves over time.
When people say they retire something, is it that they just don't use it anymore?
Correct. In other words, I have this system that we're paying $150,000 a year for. It's an old legacy system. Why are we doing that? Well, it might cost us more to swap it out than it is to fix it and change it. And then when they look at the analysis after 5 or 6 years, oh man, look what it costs to support this thing. So they'll come back and say, we need to start looking at a way to move this old system out. Yes.
There was a time about 20 years ago where screen scraping was popular.
Yes.
With IBM green screen.
Yes. Oh, yes. I remember having to do those. I don't want to even think about it anymore. But yes, screen scraping was the big thing. That's how you cleaned information, and your screen scrape would take that data and then you would put it in the system, and yeah, it's a mess. But anyway, that's the task at hand. As a project manager, product owner, or a technical team, how do I start looking at integrating and removing a legacy system? And that is one of the things that everybody's going to have to do. And you have to look at ways to identify your legacy system and start thinking about the swaps, wraps, and sprouts, and identify those.
Yes, just remembered that there was someone who was working on so it's like a continue learning university courses.
Mm-hmm. Continuing education.
Continuing education,
Mhm.
and they're trying to move everything to the new system, which means all the students would need to go to a new.
Yeah.
So then he would probably need to do something like this.
You would have to look at that as a way of
Create a shim.
create a shim. Yeah, until you can get the new systems in place. Yeah, legacy shims are really a key to deal with legacy systems.
Because for him, the continuous education stuff, it's still running as a business.
Mhm.
You can't shut it down. And
Nope.
then you have to keep, it needs to still be alive while you put new stuff in.
Now, the key to doing a legacy shim is identifying what I can really do. A lot of times you will take and say, I need to get rid of the system and try to do the whole thing. And that's doomed for failure. You won't be able to just simply swap out. It has to evolve over time. And you have to go through and define, well, what does that legacy system provide for my business? You stop thinking about the legacy system, but it's like, okay, what business functions do I need that this thing provides? And you start thinking less about the legacy system and more about what the business functions are. It provides X, Y, and Z. And then you look at that and say, okay, can I put this into a domain? And what we tend to do is we'll come in and we'll not look at what the systems are, but look at it more from what a business is. And we'll list all the business functions on a whiteboard. And then once we've done that, we'll start identifying groups of business functions that logically go together. So you'll look at all the business functions and say, okay, well, these might go together, and then you'll iterate through them and go through that a few times. And I've got examples of that on here. Let me see. Business context discovery techniques. So workflow, business function grouping, event storming, and data grouping. And that is a lot of what we tend to do when we come in, is when people say, I want to implement DDD, well, that's wide. What is it that you want to do with DDD? And you're trying to solve a problem. So what we'll try to do is start getting into these discussions. Before I go on, do we need to take a break? Everybody okay? Okay, because it's 3:30 and I've been rattling off for an hour.
Do you want to drink some juice and
I got my tea. I'm good. I drink tea. I don't drink coffee or anything.
Okay.
So anybody needs to take a break, we can do that. But anyway, the workflow dissection that we have, we like we were saying, the grouping of things according to the current business structures, and that's what it is. What are the functions that I have to do? And when you break those down, you start identifying just the high level things. You don't think about what my domain is. And what a lot of folks do is they think about the domain first and try to define the functions versus finding out what the business does and then deciding what the domain's got to be out of that. So if you read all the domain-driven design books, they always talk about starting with the domain first. Well, how the heck do I know what my domain is? I don't know what my domain is. I can come up with names and figure out what those functions might be. But if you take it the opposite way and say, hey, what are the business functions we perform? Forget the domains. Let's just figure out what we do. What does this business do? And then you start writing those down. Then you can start logically grouping them. And from there, you can start seeing what might fit into a domain. And the idea here is starting small, starting simple, and don't tackle my biggest problem. Because if you try to tackle your biggest problem with an inexperienced team, they're trying to learn multiple things at the same time. So what we try to do is we understand the problem's big, but let's start with something that we need to solve. It's another problem, but let's start with something that we can get our hands around, and you'll start figuring those out. So we tend to go in and figure out what the business does, identify what those are, and then we'll start grouping them together, a grouping of business functions, so we can figure out what the workflows and paths are. And by doing that, you have an opportunity to get a domain-driven out of that. So the best way to get started for very large domains is to figure out what your business functions are. There's always pros and cons. Like I said, it's easiest when individuals aren't familiar with the business. By having your domain experts in and you start driving down what my business functions are, you start learning more about the business. So your technical teams, your managers, your project managers, product managers, they all get a better understanding, because if you leave it to the technical team, they're going to say, well, what this app does on this does that. That's what you get, and that's not what you want. You want to know what the business wants, because you're trying to solve a business problem. So, but this approach is also fast. You'll sit up there and you'll start writing, and if you've ever done any type of whiteboarding, that's what it's for. It's easily erasable, and I can now move groups out, and I can start identifying things. And one of the cons, and I have to agree, is when used alone, it rarely yields best results. If that's all I do, then that's all I'm going to get, and it's not going to really help. So there's more to it. You need to work through and iterate. The business function grouping, this is what I was talking about. We're writing all the business functions down. We're going to group those together, and then we're going to define what each of them need and how they're closely related. And by doing that, you're allowed to define what may become domains, and that's the key word, what may become domains.
I haven't heard about business function programming, but it sounds like really promising.
Yes, and one of the things we did is we looked at what typical domain-driven design does, and they always look at the domain first, not really understanding what the business does. And that's the really important piece. You have to understand what the business is trying to do, and that's where the business functions come in. Because when you start seeing that, you might start realizing that, oh, wow, you've got 4 pieces that are trying to do what one should do. We need to take that out and let it be responsible for it. And you start identifying opportunities in the business. And in fact, some businesses have identified it and sold that process, that domain, as a output service. They said, well, we're going to make this a SOA.
I think you need to do a presentation on this on the DDD conference. I haven't seen anything related to this.
Yeah.
Because I don't even store
Yes. Yeah. Well, we get into that, but this is a combination of techniques. This is how we do our workshops. Exactly. Yes.
This is what used to be called affinity analysis.
Yes. Exactly. Exactly.
To identify
Affinity and
to identify subject areas.
yes. It's not much different. They just call them business functions. Okay. But yeah, like I said, what's old is new again. Just rebranded. Okay. Yeah, I can't believe some of the stuff that I wore in the 70s are now coming out. And I'm looking, oh, are you kidding me? Well, I should have kept that.
Where we tie-dyed.
Yeah. Oh, God. If you saw a picture of me in the 70s with long hair and bell bottoms and the felt and, oh, my God, you and I dark hair, big old hippie beard, all that. Yeah. Anyway.
An example of somebody who grouped together and created a domain for the marketing?
On which one?
Well, you mentioned that sometimes people, they group things together and then they say, hey, we can sell this.
Yes, that's correct.
Do you have an example of
Well, it would be a sales and use tax. I'll give you that example. One of the tax companies that I worked for, we broke out, they had several software packages that did sales and use tax, for different states. And they said, we ought to break that out and sell it. So,
Vertex or Avalir.
something like that. But this was, at the time, it was CLR Fast Tax. It was back in the 90s. So they had all this tax software doing basically the same thing. So when we went through, they didn't call it domain-driven design, but that's pretty much what we did. We started looking at the business functions that were provided, affinity analysis, if you will, and identified those. And they actually built a package that they sold to companies that wanted to do sales and use tax. But all of that came out of the fact that they had this software package, a group of software, that when we went through and analyzed what all of them were doing, we realized that they were all doing something similar and packaged that. And when we did that and implemented it, we said, oh, wow, we could sell that to other companies. They would love that because then they wouldn't have to worry about sales and use tax calculations for the whatever states. So they built one because they were doing software for each state and they had their own sales and use tax for each state. So they broke it up and built it in one and sold it. And that's an example. It's usually financial. I did some work for Lockheed Martin. We built a DPU system. It's defects per unit. They needed to analyze Patriot missiles built on the factory line. So we used wireless with the pen device and built a system that wrote to their SAP system. So after a while, they realized that that was useful in a lot of their assembly lines, and they moved it to their other assembly lines. Now, they didn't necessarily package it for Raytheon. That was a competitive advantage for them. But that's an example of they found it and packaged it and used it in their other departments. So those are examples of how when you start doing business function grouping, you can actually identify things by the groupings where you can actually find products that you may be able to sell as a service or as a package itself. And that is one of the companies that we talk to. They do loans, commercial or consumer loans. And they identified that through a business function grouping. They said, we could sell that to these other companies and we could get leverage on that. So that's why business function grouping is a huge, huge task to do first versus trying to identify domains up front. Because what you'll find with your business function groupings is you will get what is a quasi-domain. You can name the domain later, but at least you can identify things that are shared across multiple places and group them together. And that, from that big grouping, you can look at all the different groupings and say, let's tackle this one first. It's the smallest one. We can get our feet wet. We can actually get something accomplished with that. And we can use our sprouts, swaps, or wraps to bring this into the systems that need it. And that's where it comes in. But we mentioned event storming. Everybody talks about event storming. There's a lot of two. I don't think I'll go into too much because I think most people are familiar with the event storming. But it is to identify your communications and make sure things aren't chatty. When everybody was doing web services were chatty. That was constantly chatting back and forth, sending all this and not taking into account how much data is flowing through and that they were actually slowing down everything by being so chatty. When I first started this distributed communications, we used DCOM in Microsoft. Some of you may not know what that is, but we put that in there. It was a way to communicate distributed communication. So the initial setup was we were sending data back and forth. I thought, oh, great, look at this thing. So we implemented it in a production environment. And the network guys are saying, what in the world are you doing to my network? And we're like, what do you mean? He says, look at all this communication. You're slowing all these other things down. So it was so chatty that none of us thought that, wow, we're sending an awful lot of data across the wire. This is before the internet.
People still don't think about it.
No, they don't.
This was before the internet?
This is before the internet. Yeah, we were doing over netware. Okay, so yes, there was a time when there was no internet.
Do you
So
really need this data every 5 minutes, or can you do 15 minutes, or can you do it
correct.
once an hour, or
Right.
just nightly?
Yeah, and those are the technical details you have to talk about, which is why we talk about leaky contracts. You don't want leaky. You want just the minimum amount. And when somebody says they need it, It's not that they really want it. They want to own it. So,
Real time.
yeah.
Oh, if you can give me real time, that'll be great. Actually, we just need every day.
Yeah, well, here's what I tell people when they say, I want it real time. I said, it's going to be near real time because by the time you get it, it's already stale. So, you'll get what was available at the time, but, somebody came in right after I sent this to you and they changed it. So you'll get it the next update. So there's never any real time. I mean, unless it's coming right to you, it's not real time. Yeah, thank you. It is a unicorn. So yeah, you'll see a lot of that. So it's being realistic. I've had executives say, I want this data real time. And I have to explain to them, yeah, that screen is great and you're looking at it for 15 minutes, but sir, after the time I gave it to you, do you know that we're dealing with 1,000 transactions a second? That data is already old by the time you see it. He goes, well, I want it updated on the time. I'm like, sir, you understand that if we do that, you will never be able to see the refresh. It'll be going, it'll be like the stock market. I said, even the stock market's near real time. It's not real time.
What's
And
meant by
peop-
unicorn?
What's that?
What's meant by unicorn?
She was saying it's the unicorn, like it doesn't exist. So, but anyway, we talk a little bit about event storming, and that's everybody does that. It's just to get people to start thinking about how communications go across and making sure you can identify what the domains or your business functions are going to be. They're grouped together. You start building your bounding context, how I communicate in and out. So I prefer the business function approach first. Then we get into event storming after that. Then we do data grouping. This is where you're getting your data points, what's changing, what's flowing, what policies am I going to set up. There's pros and cons. Yeah, like I say, do not group if the user needs them together. If I need them together, that's probably not a good data grouping. You have to do some more analysis. So do group if system needs them together. It's what the system needs is what you have to identify. It's not what user A that does billing all day. It's not what her needs are. It's what the system needs. So you start having to drive. And that's why we're big on doing the business functions first. Because then you start getting the grouping, you start identifying your event storms, you start identifying your data groupings that way. And then once you get to that point, then your domains start to flesh themselves out. And when you do that, you start looking for, if I'm coming into a team that's brand new, I look for one that they can do. I don't look at, management saying, oh, I got this problem I want to solve with DDD. And we're like, I hear you here. Hey, the rest of us, we need to look at down here because this will take us a lot longer and we need to do more analysis on that. And then when you start looking at that, you get into analysis paralysis when you start trying to do the big problem first. And as a product manager or project manager, you have to solve that. But if you're introducing this to your team for the first time, management has to understand that it's going to evolve. It has to be iterative and that no domain is perfect. It will never be perfect. It will always evolve. And sometimes we've built domains where after 2 or 3 years we started noticing, wow, this domain needs this. We came out and had to create another domain because there was too much information that they were both having to keep, that we identified another domain. And then we did a swap, wrap, and a sprout and built our new domains.
So domains and business functions aren't necessarily one-to-one. So
Well, the business functions belong in a domain, okay? So what we do is we first identify the business functions so we can do get the groupings, which can lead to the domain. Does that make sense? And then we'll do our event storing and data grouping around those quasi-domains. We haven't named a domain yet. So when we do the event storming and data groupings, what we're trying to do is find out what do these things need. And if we see that something is shared between two, then we go say, well, do these groupings really belong on their own or should they be a part of this other grouping? And the idea is to try to identify those first. And yeah, you might think, oh man, it's analysis process, but it's not. You usually go through those in a couple of days, 3 or 4 days.
Well, when you go from business function to grouping to domain, will the domain have usually one business function?
No, it's going to have multiple business functions. Yeah, domain may do a bunch of different things. Great.
All business, related business functions and grouped together, basically mean for bounded context. This is the bounded context.
Yeah.
There's clear boundary context.
And you can have subdomains too within a domain. So we won't get into that, okay? But yeah, I mean, I may have to break out my domain into subdomains because there may be a relationship between those that I don't want everything in one domain. But most of the times you really have to analyze it, whether a subdomain is necessary or not. But if I,
Something context will surround the domain.
correct, yeah, it's basically what is the way to communicate. It's my window, if you will, to my domain. I call it a window. Most people get that.
Yeah, that's why even when
Open and close my window.
they're very complicated terms when you say ubiquitous language.
Yeah.
Like, yes, present everywhere. I didn't even know the meaning of ubiquitous before I read the book and I
Yeah.
actually Googled the meaning. So, you know.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Ubiquitous language is domain specific. It's not across all domains don't share the same ubiquitous language. So the way one business domain may speak, and that's why we get into the groupings, the business groupings, that also helps you define your ubiquitous language. It's creating your business language, if you will. Okay, it's particular to that business grouping. I can say this is how we talk, communicate, and speak, and then you define your language. So what a lot of people do is they'll go create a domain, define our ubiquitous language without even knowing what that domain's going to do. So how do you know what the language is?
So we had an example of that, which was blind returns. So retail stores have blind returns, and that's without a receipt.
Yes.
But blind returns with a website or shipping, that's a blind return where you don't even care who the customer is. You just have their information. You can,
Yeah.
you just enter it in. You don't know them.
Right.
You just have the product and maybe a little sheet like Amazon has.
Yeah, but again, that could be a potential all on its own where we may be really good at those and we identify those as a domain, and that could be something we actually sell to other companies
So
if you're
it's-
good at it.
But it's one company, but blind returns mean different things to different parts of the
Right.
business.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's actually, you know, you said something that's really important in the design that, you know, that it could mean different things to different people. It's based on the context you're talking about.
Right.
Yeah.
That's why when I create a glossary or something for the team, I try to know what other business terms mean so that if they're talking to somebody from a different part of the business. Because it's not that small a business
Uh-huh.
that I wrote that out.
No, but that's what you have to do. You have to have a common language that everybody understands what the meanings are. When I worked at Ernst & Young, yeah, yeah,
I want to be a project manager.
yeah. Now, when I worked at Ernst & Young, you want to talk on that about acronym heaven, okay? They could have the same acronym that had different meanings depending on who you talk to and in what office. So, you know, Cleveland was our office that did education. So their acronym would mean something totally different to the Dallas office because we were on the business side of business consulting. So when people sent emails and they were flying these acronyms, we had to pull out a dictionary and say, okay, this office is coming from here. What does that mean? And it was crazy. So, but they used an acronym for everything. So it made it very difficult for us to communicate with each other because we'd be in a meeting, we're all talking this acronym, assuming everybody knew what it meant, and we're all getting different meanings. So it's very important.
I got an email yesterday from someone working in marketing saying that something, some process, she was, way of complaining, but she said that something was recursive, and in a computer science, mind, I'm thinking, this function is called again.
Recursive. Exactly.
Yeah.
But
She's using it as a way of saying things are going backwards instead of progressing.
so it's not doing this.
English, not the program.
That's right. Yeah. So anyway, the data grouping is one of the things that I like because it does yield superior results. It is an easier approach to understand. Great when we're dealing with small domains, and that's why I like to try to do is we want to try to work with small domains first. But it is time consuming and it does require iteration. So that's some of the things you have to look at. But when you're actually working at the data grouping within that, it can really help you flesh out some of these ideas. And that's why I was saying sometimes you discover new things that you can actually sell. And that happens a lot when you start looking at common and start getting the business functions and you find out multiple applications are doing that. And when you build it, you're like, well, we can leverage this. And new industries come out from that. It's a new sales model, new revenue, new sources of recurring revenue, because a lot of times it's subscription based. So this is where data grouping comes and business function grouping comes in. It can really help you start it in, and that's why I don't want to do domains first. I want to do the business functions first. I want to identify what our business is doing and group them in a set of functions. And by doing that, then you can get into the usual event storming. And we used to call them context maps, where we would map the context descriptions between them. There were so many different meanings that did the same thing.
So you said great for small domains as opposed to big domains.
Yeah, because bigger domains are harder to break down.
Oh,
Because by data, because they're so complex. So that's why we try to leverage and do business functions first. Because if I start looking at a domain that's huge, it probably needs to be broken down. And you need to identify those big domains data, and that takes more time.
I'm going to ask Juan in the team now to actually apply data grouping, because you know the data for our greenfield application. He's the data architect. He's
Yeah.
understanding the data all the
Yeah.
time.
Well, yeah, but the data grouping comes from your business functions of what, right, you got to identify the business functions first in order what the data grouping is.
He understands.
Oh, yeah, he and I probably have gone through the same stuff over the last few years.
Yeah.
I should say decades.
That's why I've gone with the VAs to all the
Yes.
meetings.
Yeah.
Because of the ubiquitous language thing. With all due respect to the business analysts, some business analysts, they just take whatever the business says and write it down. Okay, that's a requirement.
Yeah, exactly, and that's not really what we want to do.
And then I always go with them because I say, no. What does this mean?
Mhm.
Where's
Yeah.
the analysis part?
Yeah, yeah, oh, nice.
But
Yeah.
I'm sorry to speak about my former employer, but in GM, the business analysts are just
Typer, scrapes.
replaceable people.
Just
They're
the
psycho.
business-
Interchangeable drill bits.
Type.
Yeah.
Basically, they just tell them what to type.
Yeah.
Type is, oh, put a comma here.
Yeah, we used to call ourselves interchangeable drill bits, because once the drill bit was down to the last piece, they just put another one in. So, yeah, it's just a fact of life.
I'm going to make a comment, Jason. Okay.
Okay, so we got into some things about what we're trying to do. This discovery tips. This is what we're talking about. Why we don't want to start naming our domains and all of that. We want to remove the service candidate names or the domain names, so we can make sure we identify things that we really need. And we use colors, and we use markers, the Sharpies, the red pens, to identify. Okay, this is in group red. This is group blue. This is in group B. We haven't identified the service or domain that it belongs to, but we just identify the business functions to try to group them. And by doing the color coding, we get away from app A or app B or service C. We want to stay away from that. We want to try to really identify and focus on the business. So the overarching policies, workflows, and sagas. Now, we use sagas. Those are long-running processes. We tend to use those in service bus when something has to run over a long period of time. So we'll try to look at that, how we can use that within the bounding context and work our way through that.
What do you mean by sagas?
A saga is a long-running process and may go across multiple domains. So if you think about a sales, I have shipping, I have billing, I have order fulfillment, and I have customer update. Okay, so I have to communicate across all four of those domains. So I would build another service that manages that process, and that's what we call the saga. It will send and wait for all these processes to respond back to me to say I've completed this particular process, and that's what a saga allows you to do. It's a way of having a workflow without using Windows workflow where everything was in a step, one after the other, because billing might finish before order fulfillment, which might be before shipping, which we have to look at it. Do I ship before I get billing? No. So the saga will manage that and say, we can't call this done until billing has completed. You're ready to ship, but billing hasn't finished. So the saga will say, you're not done yet. So when he gets a confirmation from billing that billing is done and that the order can be fulfilled, we checked our warehouse and all of that's done, Then he can say shipping, ship. And he can orchestrate that and make sure. So they can happen at different times. Where a typical workflow happens one after the other after the other. But what a Saga can do and say, hey, give me order fulfillment, give me billing, here's the order thing. Shipping, we're going to have an order for you. And then these can wait for these two to finish before shipping occurs, because you can never ship a product till the billing is done.
Okay, so like if someone was going through UPS and then when it arrives to your house, is that called order fulfilled?
That's order fulfillment. Order fulfillment can be I shipped it. Order completion or shipping completion is when they go up and they zzz, and I've looked at it and I can send it back to the warehouse that we actually delivered. Have you ever seen where Amazon will take a picture of leaving it at your door? That's fulfillment. That's one type of fulfillment. But it's not. Shipping fulfillment means I fulfilled this order and I've shipped it. An order fulfillment is when I've actually completed it.
Sometimes you care about those definitions because as
Right.
soon as you hand it to the carrier, then you can bill the customer.
Correct.
It doesn't matter, you can't bill them.
Until it's
But
shipped.
it's not, you have to be compliant with federal laws
Right.
when you bill them. And when you hand it over, then you can bill them.
Right. So some places will tell you, okay, we're going to bill your credit card because this takes 3 to 5 months to fulfill. Okay, and they'll pre-bill your credit card and they'll ding it and it's sitting there. And what they'll do if they can't fulfill it is they'll have to issue a credit. But it all depends on the rules. And everybody's got different rules.
Yeah, because I bought something from Fry's, for example. I ordered it and it went from Georgia but then there was a hurricane. So
Yeah.
something happened.
They still billed you though.
Still billed me,
Mhm.
then my credit card there was a transaction on my credit card bill, but I didn't get the part.
Yeah.
So then I'm going back to the store.
Yep.
to know
And
what's going on.
that's all right.
So then this saga would go across those things that are happening, right?
Yeah. So in other words, that saga is not done until you got the package. And even then it's not done because you could have an opportunity to return it. See what I mean? And it's not until, so here's a perfect example. Amazon gives you 45 days to return a product. 45 days. So that saga will sit there for 45 days. After 45 days, if you haven't returned it, they're going to say it's complete. And then it closes down, and then your window's done.
If you ask.
Yes, they can, but that's all dependent on the business rules.
Yeah.
And they get complicated, but you're right.
So if your Amazon order has a watch, a bag of box of cereal, and it's coming from
Uh-huh.
different places.
Yeah.
What's looking at where these pieces are?
That's all part of
coming
shipping.
from.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all part of the shipping. So it would be managed by that. So when you're running the saga, shipping isn't complete until all items have been shipped and received. So the saga would never get notified that shipping has been fulfilled until all products have been shipped and received. So it all depends on what the rules are. But the saga is really more for orchestrating. He doesn't have anything, he doesn't have the business logic. He just knows that I have to have this done, this done, this done, and this done before I do this. And that's all he manages. But it allows you to have long-running processes that in Service Burst world, they sleep. So I've done this step, I'll go to sleep. Oh, wake up, I got a message, does his thing, goes to sleep. And he'll sleep for however long you tell him. But that's one of the reasons why we like a distributed domain-driven design.
Is it like sleeping like event-driven, like I'll wake up when that happens?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. It wakes up when it receives an event or command or something that says, hey, I got to do something. Then it wakes up, does its thing.
The orchestration is also the word I thought of.
Yeah, but it's more of an orchestration. But the technical term is a saga.
So the policy is different than a saga because it's
Right.
sort of rule that.
Yeah, I could have a policy that says, for this, I do X. Okay, but that could be more of a policy for a particular domain. A workflow, I could have a saga, but I could still have a workflow in part of my domain. It can have a series of steps it has to do before it informs the saga of the next step. So like you were saying, I got a shipment from 3 different areas. Well, I'm not going to update the saga until all 3 of those things have been completed. But that's its workflow, but that's specific to the domain. So that's what you try to do is identify those type of things. And we're going to get back to the behavioral thing that I was talking about earlier with Boosh. We don't model entities. An entity would have your data and your business logic. We model capabilities. So that's what we try to do. look for the linguistic boundaries, who owns the data, who are our domain experts in their boundaries, organizational boundaries. Every organization has boundaries. You have to try to identify those. And this happens all the time. There's an argument. And people are, it's one way or the other way. And the best thing we found is just, let's come back to that. We'll move on. Because we tend to see if it's taken longer than 15 minutes to get to the next level, because two people are arguing, the other 8 or 10 people are sitting there looking at their watches and texting, it's probably time to move on. So we're not saying one way or right. We technically, when we come in, we don't tell you what to do. You know your business better than we do. But what we'll do is help you organize it and structure it so you can get to those business functions. And we will ask the questions, and we'll try to help you get to that direction. But you know the business better than we do. We have a lot of experience, but that doesn't mean we know your business. So it's best to let the business experts and domain experts communicate what it is they're trying to do. We help orchestrate it, like a saga, if you will, and try to help you get to a goal and a ruling that says, okay, we can start here. But the big thing is the analysis paralysis. You could sit there 4 weeks trying to drive these domains and get nothing done. So we try to target, let's get a grouping, let's try to identify that. Which one of these do you think would be a good starting point? Let's start with that one. And let's walk through that. And let's iterate that, and let's see what it looks like when we're done. And then we can name the domain at that point. So that's why we try to do it opposite of what the book says, because they all start with a domain, and that kind of pigeon-toes you into that what you think that domain needs, and you haven't really thought what the business does. So there's what we got. Traditional discovery. We have function grouping, event storming, data grouping, and give and gets. And then we would typically go into a discovery workshop and actually work you through that. So,
That's a cool workshop.
yeah, I wish I had that. I could do a lot of work.
Could you put the arrows in?
Absolutely. Those right there. So this is approach has come from us doing this over a number of years and learning what we found to be the best way to approach this, because everybody wants to start with domains and start working their way down, and they want to solve their biggest problem first. And as we all know, sometimes your biggest problem is your biggest problem for a reason, and it's the hardest one to solve. So you first have to teach the teachers, if you will. Make sure you can get people to understand what this means. Give the management a chance to see what it takes to do it before they start saying, okay, we're going to use this everywhere. Like I said, this is not everything. I got a hammer. Not everything looks like as a nail. You don't want to use it for everything. So you have to use it where it makes sense.
So if you don't get management buy-in, then you normally...
Yeah, if management won't buy in, you have to give them a cost benefit or an ROI. They have to know what this is going to do for me. Because you can't just say, oh, this is a cool thing, we ought to do it. You know how many times I've heard that over the decades? Oh, look at this new technology, we ought to do it. Okay, let's go do it. Not realizing that in 6 months it's gone. Like a lot of Microsoft products that a lot of people did, that they said, oh man, this is the latest from Microsoft, we should implement it. Oh, it's gone now. Okay, we spent 6 months doing what? So, the new shiny toy is not always the right choice.
Okay, so just highlight some of the things that go into the different arrow boxes.
Your traditional discovery, we're going to go through and take a look at what our systems are and try to find out what they provide. Okay. Your function grouping and event storming, I'm going to take a look at what those business functions are. So first I'm identifying the particular areas in my business. Try to see what those are. Then I'm going to try to define what the business functions each of those areas do.
So
Not
the
as a,
areas are in the traditional discovery?
yeah. So I'm going through and I'm saying, okay, so I've got this area of business, this area of business. I've got another area of business, and I try to make sure that I've got that identified so I can start defining what my business functions are going to be out of these areas.
What would be an example of a business area?
Shipping, accounting, sales. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different areas. Those are high level.
The business function
It could be a function, but shipping is so big. There's so many business functions that shipping does. You try to identify those.
You could have multiple distribution centers.
Yeah.
So some of them could be a third-party distribution center.
Right.
And
Yeah.
one of them could be your own.
Yeah, and your shipping may have to deal with a legacy or third-party system, which is where the legacy and third-party a legacy shim can also be used for a third-party shim because I may want to switch out my third-party later. Okay, so that's one way to look at those. So that's why we try to isolate dependencies as much as possible. So every business I know has one way or sometime changed suppliers, changed somebody who's supplying a business function for me. So I need to be able to isolate that and swap that out. And that's why we're big on shims with legacies and third-party vendors because that gives you the option to swap it out whenever you want. And if you've done your wrap correctly and you've followed the solid principles, then it's going to be less painful to swap out a third-party vendor because you've already defined your ins and outs in your contracts.
Yeah, and then a data group is just where the data goes, but then where the gives and the gets.
Yeah, you're basically going to go back on, we'll give you this, we'll get this. It's back and forth. It's
Contract.
Yeah, it's basically saying what we're going to provide you and you're going to provide me, but your contracts.
Trying to discover where you
Yeah.
might be a little chatty.
Yeah, exactly.
What kind of
Leaky.
data?
Leaky or chatty.
Shipping.
It's where you're trying to discover if the like data groupings, messages, boundaries that you've defined are a little chattier.
Yeah, remember how we talked about leaks and chat? Yeah, it's too much information. The domains are holding too much of the same data.
TMI.
TMI. Yeah, too much information. That's a good way.
Information you need to give collections.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly right. How much do I have to give you to really perform your job? Well, give me everything. Well, that's not the answer. I can't give you everything because it's going to be stale the minute you get it. So I'm going to give you just enough for you to go do what you have in your system. It's going to be identified this way. Okay? And then you can contact me when you've fulfilled your obligation to get my money back that's owed me, and you're going to notify me based on the loan ID and how much money you collected. Because collections could be, okay, we're going to try to get all of it, but what's the minimum percentage you'll accept? And they may say 30%, 50%, 80%. They may say, okay, they're so many days late, they've been a good customer, you apply this percentage rule. And believe me, collections has that. So if I've been a long-time customer and I'm 90 days late, do you think they're going to penalize me because I'm 90 days late and I've been with them for 20 years? Probably not. They'll probably give me the benefit account. They'll send it to collections. Collections say, hey, we noticed you're 90 days overdue. Do you want to go ahead and make that up? And it's due on account versus no percentage at all.
So
Okay.
where you had a lot of domains, but somewhere around here you would have a legal team doing stuff in some sort of domain, wouldn't you?
Maybe. They may be a part of a team. They may be over a collection of teams, but you might have a contracts domain.
Oh.
Okay? You may have a domain that deals nothing but contracts, and it may be associated to a customer. It could be loan details. Okay, I've got a contract, I got to sign it up, but it might be loan processing. That could be the domain, and they're part of that as a subdomain.
And would user experience look at everything?
User experience will be based on the domain's composite UI element. So you would have that UI. So I'm going to build this UI component. Somebody may oversee that and make sure that UI component fulfills what the overall company's is for branding. They may want to leverage that into multiple brands. For instance, a credit union that I worked with, we built these components, these composite UI components, and they rebranded it based on the credit union. All they did was just apply a different style. But guess where all the data went? Went to the domain. It was just defined by that particular credit union.
The data that a user experience domain would want to get would be.
It could, again, that's where you have to define the gives and gets. Okay, that's where all the gives and gets come in because you think of the domain as a complete piece. It's back end, services provided, my contract and communication in and out, my window, if you will, and what the UI presents.
I was thinking that user experience people will tend to look at the entire design and see how everything's laid out.
But the user experience people are involved in the initial setup of the composite UI. They're not something after the fact. They have to be a part of it. So you will have, in fact, we had UI folks with us when we were building these pieces. It was not done in a vacuum.
So
They-
they're involved in all the,
They're involved in the UI component and the data needs. So in other words, they may be working with the business, and the business says, well, we need to make sure we have this data available. So this domain, and because they were involved in the domain setup, they are already familiar with it. And that was one of the things that we had to do to overcome, was sales was driving everything. The sales guys were telling you what all the clients want. We found out it was one client out of 100. So you were spending all this time on one client where the other 99 weren't get fulfilled. So there's a buffer. That's why they have to be all involved. So they were dictating to the business analyst. The analyst would come to us, and we find out that this guy, I can make this one sale if you put this one feature in. And you want to avoid that. So that's why we talk about business functions first.
you avoided that by talking to
Everybody.
everyone.
Can I raise hand here? We need to keep moving.
Uh,
Because we have limited time, so.
Yeah, I'm pretty close to done. I don't think I have too much more. We're going to do a discovery workshop, your BC validations, like we said, event storming, gives and gets, leakiness, and chattiness. We've kind of already talked about that. We also kind of went to the validation of event storming. Teams work together to identify these events and what's passed between the bounding contexts. This is kind of some of the things we talked about. Data on events is flushed out as completely as possible. That's so we can minimize the amount of leaks and chattiness between them. And then the components are regrouped in order to minimize chattiness and leakiness. So the idea of the business functions and the components is if the data needs to communicate, we put all of those things together so they're not leaking information. So I got this bounding context defined. I don't want to leak to another bounding context data it doesn't need and shouldn't have. And we got into the part of PII where I don't want to leak that out anywhere because I'm the one responsible for its security. And I've protected that. Okay, we got into gives and gets. Isolation and plan for what they need from other teams. That's the other key thing. What information do I need from this team in their particular bounding context? And you try to identify those so you don't have leaks and chattiness also. So I need this in order to identify this for me. So I might carry your IDs here, and when I need something, I will raise an event that says, here's the ID, present this data for me. Okay? Yeah, so we talk about the iterative nature of this type of process, and that's what they call rounds. Round 1, round 2, we go through it and do asks. Asks are considered and compared to previous asks from other teams. So I've asked for this information, you've asked for this information, and we compare and make sure that the teams know what's coming around. And it's not one team talking to another team. We want to make sure that all the teams that are involved in building this application are really talking to each other and know what data needs that they have. So it's all the ubiquitous languages, the teams are talking to each other. We have the scrum of scrums, if you will, where all the scrum teams designate a person to go so they can talk to the other scrum teams in the scrum of scrums so they can all be identified in what's going on. And if the teams need to meet and talk about this, then they'll do that. And then, of course, contracts. What's the contracts? We try to negotiate that and make sure we can fulfill our contract for other teams that need it. And this is just kind of an example of what the rounds are and who's talking to who and who's done what for what round. And that's just an example. And then, of course, we talked about the leakiness, the payments and collections. We said that's too much information. This is what we removed after the negotiations and the rounds. We said we will provide this. This is really all we need to send over to collections. This is what you need to do in order to do your job, but you don't need any of the loan. Why would a collector need the loan details? Okay, it doesn't make sense. You don't need to know the fee amount. We just told you the amount. Here's the remaining balance due. This is what we want, because we calculated the remaining balance due based on a fee. You just need to go collect this for us. And another agreement may be, in some payments and collections, is depending on the customer status. We may have a customer status. We will give this out. We can say their customer level, treat them this way. But I may pass a customer level only. I won't tell you what that means. It's just that tells you that based on the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 client, you handle it this way. And that could be what collections says. You need to tell us what tier customer they are so we know how to handle it. Yeah.
But collections needs to know how much money to collect.
Right, that's what the remaining balance is. So in other words, I've calculated the fee, the penalty, and I'm telling you this is what's left. This is what they owe us. This is what I want you to collect. Okay, it's just a contract. You can define it whatever you want, but this is just an example. The remaining balance takes in late fees and overcharge, whatever they have to do. That's what the remaining balance. As a collector, I just need to know how much they owe us. That's all I don't care about. How much do they owe us? And that's what it comes back. So when you do that, you now have a much, much smaller communication going back and forth. And that's all you need. And you see how much that's where the data groupings and your contracts come in. You start working through those and you start identifying it, and it becomes that. And yeah, here's another one, validation chattiness. This can get really crazy. So you want to try to identify chattiness and determine if it's necessary or not. So you may be raising events, and the marketing may say, I need every event. And you're going to go, okay, that's going to get really chatty. And you may come and say, well, what do you really need? Okay, so you'll go through these and take a look at it and identify, well, what is necessary for because marketing will tell you, I want it all. Give me everything about them.
Big pain point.
Yes.
Maintenance, the overhead of the chattiness is
Yeah.
very-
And that's where the contracts and negotiations have to go. That's why we say, round one, we almost teach it as a boxing match, because a lot of times it is. It can get really tense. So that's why we say we try to limit the arguments and move forward. Okay, we're not going to solve this one. Let's go to the next. Let's go to the next. So that's some of the things. And that's where the give and gets come in. You have to go back and say, marketing says everything. Well, it's like, well, we can't give you everything because we will tie up the network all day with just your request. What are you going to do with the data? Well, we might need is the key word there. Might need to do. No. What do you really need to do? Because we can give you only so much information. Okay, and that's where the give and gets have to come in. You have to talk to each of the various groups. And marketing is its own domain. They may have its own set of things that they want to do. You've come to us. Marketing says, okay, for customer A, they've bought X amount of dollars. So they've seen what the billing is. They say, give them this promotion. So now marketing throws a promotion deal on the site because you are tier A customer. See, and that's where marketing domain can come in. So that's kind of why they want all that stuff, but a lot of times it's just, it's fluff. So, and then we get into validation workshops and try to validate the chattiness. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. And it's question time, but we kind of went through it all at the same time, which I kind of like.
Can you just clap?
Oh, no, you don't have to do that.
Really, really great presentation.
Thank you.
I got